There's the analogy of a frog being boiled. If you put a frog in a boiling cauldron of water, it's going to jump out. But if you put him in a cold cauldron of water and you gradually raise the temperature, the frog doesn't realize he's being cooked. And that's what's happening to us right now. Gradually, step by step, sanctions bill by sanctions bill, anti-diplomacy bill by anti-diplomacy bill, we're being cooked and put on this path to war.
These sanctions against Iran's central bank, these sanctions effectively cut off any any foreign company or country from doing business with the U.S. if they do business with Iran. So it's the classic, you're either with us or against us kind of ideology we saw under the Bush administration being enacted into economic warfare.
What's happening right now, or has been over the last few years, is that just because we say we don't want war, and we're taking sanctions to be the acceptable alternative option, as opposed to diplomacy, as opposed to talking to people. The sanctions that have started, and throughout the Iran-Iraq war, there were some sanctions, but not significant. Iranian companies were doing business with American companies. Until 1995, there was a very easy flow through of people coming and going. And it's important because that exchange and that openness of ordinary people coming and going, business being done and so forth, helped generate the reform movement in Iran and give them life and give them a sense of sort of wanting to bring about change. 1995, thanks to President Clinton and AIPAC, the sanctions start to take on a heavier toll. And basically, over the last 15, 16 years, we've seen them getting worse and worse, especially recently. And the irony is that, as I say, one, it's like this is the acceptable policy even for liberals and progressives. But there is also this mentality that if we make it tough enough, people will rise up and bring about regime change in Iran. Because ultimately we want to get rid of this regime. This regime is the worst thing in the history of the world. It's a pretty bad regime, but it did not foment 9/11, by the way. It did not, right? And it did help us in Afghanistan and so forth. So what sanctions have done is they've undermined the private sector. They have emboldened the black market and the more insidious elements of the government. And the last few years especially, what we're seeing is that as the private sector is beginning to shutter up because they can't buy raw ingredients to produce, whether it's soya milk or anything else, the young people that are coming through, and it's a very young population as the whole region is, where are they getting jobs? Who can offer them a job? It's the government. And which arms of the government? It's the security arm. So what we are doing, what our policies are doing, is we are basically pushing a generation of young men to become security actors for the state so that their daily earnings are tied to their ability to oppress and to be violent, whether they want to be or not. It's not to Israel's benefit, what we're doing. It's not to Israel's security benefits to have an Iran that would be weakened and would be like Pakistan, perhaps. It's not to the US's benefit. Iran right now has a population of 70 million people who are actually westward looking, but maybe in the next 10 years would be radicalized and not be so, right? So it's not to the interest of Iran, it's not to the interest of Israel, it's not to the interest of the United States. Who is benefiting from all this rhetoric and this bombastic language? It's AIPAC. I don't know who else is benefiting from it.
My sister was actually in Iran in December and January this year, and she said that, while she was there, that shops in the heart of Tehran had almost completely bare shelves, that these were shops that were running out of basic food staples like rice and beans because people were stockpiling to prepare for a US and Israeli attack on Iran.
The way to stop that is by actually doing the unthinkable, talking to Iran, sitting down around the table and having diplomacy, and doing what the United States has had the courage to do in the past, which is to actually stand face to face with our adversaries and figure out how do we prevent this from escalating into something that would be devastating for everybody involved.
The best way to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, and none of us want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, none of us want any country to have a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons are destabilizing for all of us. The best way to do that is through diplomacy. The worst way to do that is through bombing Iran and guaranteeing that hardliners would be emboldened in Iran to press for nuclear weapons.
Now, before I came to NIAC in 2009. Before that, I was working on the Hill. I worked for Congressman Brian Baird from Olympia, who I think a lot of you may know. And I was there, you know, in those meetings with AIPAC after Obama got elected. And they were scared to death. They didn't like that this guy was saying he was going to actually engage Iran and talk to these guys. Because the thought that the United States could have a détente, could have rapprochement with Iran, is threatening to those who thrive on this confrontation, who thrive on the contest between Iran and Israel, and this threat of war in order to sustain an untenable status quo in the Middle East.
We were trying to calculate how many days or hours of direct diplomacy have happened between the US and Iran over the last 30 years. Just take the last 3 years of the Obama administration. I think with Jamal we had this conversation, and it came up, it's less than 24 hours. Okay, so when they say diplomacy hasn't worked, negotiations hasn't worked, what are they talking about? Even a friendly divorce would require more conversation than we've had with a country and in a situation where if there is war, whether it's meant to be or whether it's accidental, because we don't even talk to them around things like in the Persian Gulf where it's become a traffic jam with God knows who with their frigates and their little boats and so forth. We don't know who to talk to. And it could trigger what basically could end up being something akin to a modern day World War III, right? Less than 24 hours of direct talks.
We've had 3 meetings with Iran. President Obama, when he was on the campaign trail.
The notion that somehow not talking to countries is punishment to them, which has been the guiding diplomatic principle of this administration, is ridiculous.
He said, I'm going to break from the Bush administration's failed policies. I'm going to actually engage our enemies. I'm not going to refuse to even talk to the people that we're threatening from, you know, from across the world, but I'm going to engage them. And then he came into office, and I think his vision was good. I trust that Obama actually had a vision to talk to Iran and to end the 30 years of institutionalized enmity that has characterized that relationship. But diplomacy is not a cakewalk. Diplomacy is tough. There are forces in place that don't want to see this happen. And that's what this is really about. You want to stop war, you got to talk. AIPAC, Netanyahu, hardliners in Iran and Israel and the United States and Congress, they don't want talks with Iran. They like the trajectory that we're on. And so we had one talk with Iran, and those didn't go the way that we had hoped. We sat down with them for a day, a few hours, and when that didn't work, we transitioned immediately back to the sanctions path, immediately back to the George W. Bush strategy of pressure, pressure, pressure. And that's where we are now.
A question I get a lot is, well, why are we lobbying Congress? Isn't it the president who actually runs U.S. policy toward Iran? And I think it's very instructive that, at least in my anecdotal experience, that it's actually Iranians and other foreigners that have a better sense than we do about how Congress is running the show on this issue and on so many other foreign policy issues.
But what's happening right now on Capitol Hill, and what is being strongly supported by Bibi Netanyahu and by AIPAC, is to say, okay, fine. Iran's not working to build a nuclear weapon, fine. Instead of saying that our red line is Iran building a bomb, we're going to say our red line is Iran having the capability to build a bomb. So if Iran even theoretically could have the capability to build a bomb, we need to go in and strike them. They're moving the goalposts. They're lowering the threshold. And now we have a resolution introduced in the Senate by our good friends Joe Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, and Bob Casey. And in the House by the leaders of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the ros-lehtinen and Berman. And what the resolution does is it says we cannot contain a nuclear weapons capable Iran. The red line for us is capability. Obama has never, ever said that. He has always said, I mean, disagree with him as much as you want, he has said the red line is if Iran moves to build a bomb. They're changing the goalpost. They're saying capability is when we need to go in, and they're going to try to force that on the president. And unless folks like you stand up and say, hold on a second, this is a war resolution. This is a war authorization. This is the political signal to either this president or, who knows, the next guy in office. You go in and you bomb Iran whenever you want, because they have the capability.
Bob wrote an article about these pending resolutions in Congress that would push the U.S. away from diplomacy toward war, that points out that while these bills don't provide technical authorization for war, they do provide the political authorization for war, the political cover for war. So our job is to build the political cover to enable the U.S. to talk to Iran. We need to be the architects and the construction workers who are building that space, supporting on the pillars of U.S. public opinion, where a peaceful solution to the conflict between the U.S. and Iran can be negotiated. And if we build it, our elected representatives will come.